What would happen if one day you woke up reincarnated in the body of a demon? Hated by everyone, living a nightmare life until you unlock a rare power that changes everything. Well, that's exactly the story we're diving into today. So, let's begin. The main character, Chinu, was lying in bed but couldn't sleep. He felt uncomfortable, like the bed was too small and his legs didn't fit. After a moment, he realized he had already gone through all this and somehow ended up in a strange world of writers. Suddenly, a girl appeared beside his bed and told him to wake up immediately. When Chinu looked at her, she asked and discussed why he was still in bed at this hour. She said the aunt wasn't going to send him a personal invitation to come to the kitchen. The girl was Julie, a third-year high school student and a rank 2 martial artist. She was the best student at her school. When Chinu looked at her, he realized this was the real deal, but Julie didn't like what he said and started yelling at him, saying he had no right to call himself the son of the emperor, a knight of the order of the centurion, or a 4th rank fighter, while the two of them were arguing in the room under the stairs. The woman in the kitchen was calmly making breakfast, not paying attention to them. When they came to the table, Yuna told her daughter to be nice to Chinu since he was her brother. But Yuli said she didn't see him as a brother, she saw him as an enemy, even though Yuna asked her not to say such things. Chinu thought to himself that Yuli was right, based on the memories of the body's original owner. Not only was he her enemy, but he was also the one who finished Yuna's husband. Yet now he was sitting at the same table with her. 11 years ago, the gates of Shay opened and hundreds of thousands of demons came out, bringing destruction. The whole empire united to push them back. They eventually withdrew, but some of them left behind descendants. One of those descendants was Chinu, the main character. He was only 16 and a first-rank warrior. When he stood up from the table, a glass of water suddenly flew at him. Uli had thrown it and said, the empire should never have accepted someone like him. She wouldn't calm down, but Chinu didn't respond to her words. Yuna tried to calm her daughter. Chinu went back to his room, sat on the bed, and started thinking. He understood that Julie's anger was because of her father's death, but he didn't think she truly believed he was a bastard. No matter how much people hated him, no one had tried to deal with him directly. Now he was wondering what to do next. He thought maybe the system would wake up now. As he covered his eyes with his hands, he felt his horns start to tingle like electricity was running through them. Then he heard a voice in his head saying the system had been activated. Surprised, he jumped up and looked around. Suddenly, a screen appeared in front of him saying he could improve his skills by using energy from opponents. But for now, he had no opponents. Chinu thought this was great news. Later, he left the room and decided that now that he had a system, he shouldn't have to do chores anymore. Then, the system reminded him that in his previous life, he died after being beaten up and sent to the hospital. He had a fight with another patient there, which led to his death from hypoxia. As he walked through the hallway, he noticed no one else was home except Aunt Yuna. He was happy about that since if Yuli were around, she'd definitely beat him up. Yuna would probably just scold him a little. So, he decided to try scaring her and testing the system. He walked up behind her and made a scary pose, hoping to surprise her, but Yuna reacted quickly. She grabbed a knife and held it to his neck. Having sensed someone behind her, she asked what he was doing there. Chinu froze and didn't say a word. Yuna told him she didn't need any help and that he should go rest. The system informed the main character that the girl had intense hatred, which was why her energy was always active. At that moment, he realized this was how the system worked. He also understood that Aunt Yuna deeply hated him, too. He decided not to argue with the girl, bowed his head, and chose to do what she said. He quickly went to his room under the stairs before things got worse. He locked the door and sat down, thinking that this woman was completely abnormal. He could feel how strong her energy was, and now he realized it was all because of him. He tried to understand who she really was, just someone crazy or someone who acted fake. But in the end, he figured it didn't matter because her hatred was helping him gain energy. So he decided to live by the idea that what doesn't finish you makes you stronger. Then he turned to the system and chose to increase his physical strength. With each level, the cost to improve grew, but he didn't know where to get that much energy. He thought maybe he should appear in front of his aunt more often. But he was afraid of what might happen, so he decided to go to his little sister's room instead. He opened the door and said he wanted to talk, but he came at the wrong time. Julie was changing her clothes. When she saw her stepbrother standing there, she quickly covered herself and screamed. Chinu turned red, but he said she had nothing to hide from him. He joked that they both had the same things and even showed off his muscles, saying his chest was bigger than hers. Julie didn't find it funny. She punched him in the stomach and looked like she wanted to finish him. The system told him that her anger had been used, which gave him some energy. Julie was a bit shocked because she had hit him really hard. But Chinu quickly recovered, cleared his throat, and said that the punch was pretty weak. He thought to himself that this was exactly what he needed. It wasn't a waste after all. He stood by the door, waiting until she started changing again, which made Julie even angrier. She started punching him again, and the system kept confirming that her anger was giving him energy. Then Julie kicked him in the face, and he flew to the other side of the room. The system said that 500 energy units had been collected from her anger. While Shenyu was lying on the floor, he looked through the crack in the door and saw Yuna's face. She asked what he was doing in her daughter's room. At that moment, he saw Yuna's hatred grow even more, and it scared him. He stood up slowly, said he would go back to his room, and wished them both good night. After Yuna entered the room, Julie assumed Chinu had just been trying to make a joke. Meanwhile, Chinu returned to his room and decided to test his new strength. He took a knife and stabbed himself in the stomach, but instead of cutting him, the knife broke. The system then informed him that he had reached level 11 warrior. The next day, he had to go to school. He packed his things and headed to the building, thinking of it as a place full of energy that could help him grow. When he saw his classmates, he showed him the middle finger. He decided he would rely only on his own education and on expressing his feelings freely. His plan worked. The system started informing him non-stop that his strength was increasing because of the hatred people felt toward him. That's when Shinyu realized this wasn't just a school, it was an energy field for him. Julie, who was watching all of this, didn't understand what was going on with her brother. He used to hate going to school, but now he looked unusually excited. Meanwhile, Shani walked into school with a smile on his face. Someone called out to him from behind. When he turned around, he saw Uran, his homeroom teacher. Standing next to her was the school's goddess, who looked surprised that Chinu had finally shown up. She asked how he was feeling, saying she'd heard he was a little sick. Chinu turned to answer her, but at that moment, he felt his energy go up by 55. He figured Uran was pretending to care and probably hated him too. But when he looked back, he saw his annoyed male classmates and realized this time it was about jealousy. So he decided to take advantage of the situation and accidentally fell on Uran, saying he was actually feeling fine. The girl misunderstood and assumed he was still weak since he couldn't stand up. So she said she'd take him to the infirmary. Meanwhile, Chinu was still lying on top of his teacher and the rest of the students stood frozen in shock. Not believing what they were seeing, Chinu looked up at Uran and said he felt weak because of love and that maybe school wasn't so bad after all. Later, while he was sitting calmly on a bake, some classmates came up behind him with a huge bag, ready to attack. They tried to pull the bag over his head, but Shenyu wasn't scared. He treated them like practice dummies and decided to try some new moves. Even though he couldn't see, he needed one of them in the face and started a full-blown fight. Julie was watching everything from behind a wall. She looked closer and recognized the guy under the bag. It was her stepbrother, Chinu. Seeing him getting attacked made her furious because she believed that only she had the right to beat him. So she stepped in, but she didn't realize Chinu couldn't see who was attacking him. He ended up punching her in the face. The hit was strong and Julie flew backward and landed face down on the ground. After the fight, Chinu stood over his classmates victorious. He took off the bag and let out a breath. Then he saw Yuli on the side and realized he had heard her voice correctly. He also understood that maybe Yuli didn't hate him as much as he thought. Not only had she helped him, but she also seemed to hate him less than the others. Realizing this, Chinu sighed and thought that Julie was definitely different. He picked her up, carried her on his back, and took her home since she couldn't walk at that moment. Things calmed down for a while after that. Uli told her mom she had just gotten distracted during training and missed a few moves, which was why she had bruises. Meanwhile, Chinu focused on gaining more energy points. He stirred up self-hatred among his classmates and constantly annoyed the teacher. He even interfered in their love lives by exposing their secrets to each other. He also stopped by the principal's office and told him that someone had dropped their anti-fall mom and he was just kind enough to return her. One day, it was North County High School's Religion Day, a competition between schools, but when Chinu got to school, he noticed that no one was there. He had no idea what was going on and assumed classes had just been cancelled. Suddenly, Chinu heard loud voices coming from the other side. He looked toward the next room which was next to the school building and realized that all the students were gathered there. This made him happy and he thought that now everyone would be within his reach. Meanwhile, inside that room, a fight was going on. There was an arena where students were competing. One of the participants turned out to be Julie. When Chinu entered, he saw his half-sister and at first thought her opponent was unlucky to face her. But when he looked more closely, he saw that Yuli was actually losing. Someone had thrown her into the air, and just as she was about to hit the ground, Chinu ran over and caught her. He noticed scratches on her face and that she was breathing heavily. Julie looked up and saw the fighter she had been facing still standing in the arena. His name was Bai and he was the heir to the White Dog Company. Bai looked at Yuli, who was about to pass out, laughed, and called her weak for being the daughter of a knight from the Centurion Order. He said it was funny, then turned to the teacher and asked him to announce that he was now the new representative of the third high school class. Chinu couldn't believe what was happening. He didn't understand how someone as strong as Julie could get injured so badly by a classmate. He remembered that earlier in the morning, Julie had told her mom she was heading out on business. When she passed Chinu, she told him not to get involved and said he was probably the only one at school who didn't know what was going on. Chinu didn't understand what she meant, but Uli told him not to worry about it and that he'd find out soon. She also mentioned that starting today, he could join the knights. At the time, Chinu remembered that Aunt Yuna had lifted the age restrictions, so he didn't understand why Uli suddenly allowed him in. Later, after Yuli made it to the finals of the class representative matches, Uran reminded all the participants to put friendship first and competition second. Then, she announced the start of the final match to decide the class representative for the Northern District High School tournament. She introduced the first participant, Julie, the daughter of the lead knight and a second-year student. Then she introduced the second participant, by heir to the White Dog Company, also a second-year student. She wished them both good luck. As soon as the match started, Julie grabbed her sword and rushed to attack. Bai thought he could block her easily, but she moved too fast and he barely had time to put his shield up. When he realized Julie wasn't going to stop, he quickly used his magic armor. Julie then stabbed Bai in the back with her sword, hoping to end the fight, but it had no effect. Bai turned around and knocked her down, throwing her across the arena. He saw a chance to attack and laughed, asking if she really thought she could beat a future knight in speed. But Julie didn't give up. She broke through his armor and told him not to expect an easy win. Then she launched a powerful move called the Mounted Knight Strike from above. The impact was so strong that Bai was pinned to the ground. Coughing, his smoke and dust rose around him. Julie stood in front of him with a smile, placed her sword at his neck, and said the winner had already been decided. Uran walked up to Yuli with a smile and said she was ready to announce the winner. But before she could say Yuli's name, they suddenly heard a strange sound behind them. Julie tensed up but didn't have time to react. Bai rushed forward and punched her in the back, sending her flying out of the ring. As she hit the ground, Bai smiled and said that the victory was his. It turned out that earlier Uran had visited Yuna at her home. She told her that she wanted to remove Bai from the fight, but the school insisted that the match would happen the day after tomorrow. So the teacher couldn't do anything except transfer Yuli to another school if requested. She apologized to Yuna, addressed her as a centurion, and said she hoped Yuli would win the duel. Yuna reminded her that the title centurion had been banned 10 years ago, so she shouldn't be using it either. Then she changed the topic back to her daughter and said she trusted that Uran had done everything she could. Uran replied that it wasn't her fault, but the school's. She added that if it weren't for Yuna's regiment fighting hard on the battlefield 10 years ago, they wouldn't even have the peace they had today. She said she was doing everything she could to help Julie become a class representative and join the order. But Yuna knew that her daughter had failed, ended up losing, and was now in the hospital with a broken leg. She thanked Uran for explaining everything. Uran noticed it was getting late and said she had to leave. Yuna didn't stop her as Uran got up to leave. Chinu came out of his room and offered to walk her home. While walking down the street, Uran thanked him for keeping her company. Chinu then asked if Bai would really become the high school representative. Uran said that unless someone defeated him by tomorrow afternoon, he would officially get the position. From her expression, it was clear she didn't like Bai either, but she couldn't do anything about it. She then asked why Shani was interested. He said he was just worried about his classmates. He couldn't stop thinking about how his stepsister lost to Bai and how much she had wanted to win. Uran gave a small smile and said she hoped all of this would help bring the class together. The next day, school started as usual. Bai sat at his desk looking pleased. His classmates kept glancing at him, some sarcastically, but he didn't care. He was sure that after the competition ended and he got the title, top universities would start competing to recruit him. He believed that one day he would be at the top and get everything he wanted. So the opinions of his classmates didn't bother him. He never saw them as real competition. Just then, Chinu entered the room and slammed his fist on the door. He looked at the students and asked if the so-called heir was there. Bai realized he was talking about him and looked shocked. He jumped up, slammed his fists on the desk, and asked Chinu what he was doing there, calling him a loser. At that moment, the system notified Chinu that his energy had risen to 120 because of Bai's hostility. Chinu calmly said Bai could call him whatever he wanted. The system kept sending messages about his increasing energy. Chinu walked up to Bai and told him he was here to challenge him and he was waiting for him to accept. Bai responded by saying that their levels were too different, and when he heard the challenge, a confident smile appeared on his face. He was sure that defeating Chinu would be easy, so he accepted right away. As soon as he agreed, Chinu grabbed his hair and slammed his head onto the desk, saying that since he had officially proposed a fight, he should show respect and bow properly. He held Bai down with full force, making him look completely helpless. This action caused Chinyu's energy to rise by 621. Soon after, the boys headed to the training field. When Uran heard what was going on, she was shocked. Chinu was only at level 1.1, while Bai was at 2.7. She was sure Chinu would get himself finished, but the students told her that both boys were already in the ring. The teacher knew that once a fight started in the ring, she had no right to stop it. She could only step in if the situation became hopeless. Meanwhile, Chinu and Bai got ready for the battle. Bai warned Chinu that once the fight began, it would be too late to back down. He pointed out that Chinu didn't even have a proper combat uniform and assumed he couldn't afford one. Chinu just smiled and asked Bai if he really thought he deserved to be treated with respect just because of the rules. This made Bai angry. He raised his weapon and shield and activated a skill called Lift Stream of Power. He charged at Chinu, saying that after one hit, Chinu would be as good as dead. Bai believed in his abilities, both offensive and defensive, and since he had managed to hold off Yuli, he was confident this fight would be easy too. But before Bai could land a hit, Chinu countered with a punch that broke Bai's weapon. Then he hit Bai straight in the chest with another punch, sending him flying across the training area. The students were shocked. No one expected this kind of result. Uran was also surprised, as she was sure nothing good would come out of this for Chinu. Chinu kept attacking Bai, saying that in his next life he should try to be a better person. At that point, Uran decided to step in. She told Chinu to stop since the fight was already over and he had clearly won. She warned him that if he didn't stop, he might end up finishing Bai, and then both his aunt and sister could be court-martialed. But Chinu didn't seem to hear her. She walked up to him and placed her hand on his shoulder. In that moment, Chinu nearly hit her out of instinct, still caught up in the fight. Then he snapped out of it and looked at Bai, who was unconscious. He realized that Ur was right. Uran told him she appreciated that he trusted her. Then she called the medical team to take Bai away. She thought to herself that the white dogs would probably investigate what happened. But since it was Chinu involved, the issue could be handled. So she did what she believed was the right thing. She walked over to Chinu and asked if he wanted to become the high school representative. Later, Uran was called to the principal's office. When she arrived, the principal was already there sitting with two colleagues. Principal Lee, who was a tiger, asked Uran what she thought of Chin Yu's actions. Uran replied that she believed Chin Yu had acted appropriately because it was Bai who broke the rules first by attacking Yuli. Then Vice Principal Lu, who was a servant, stepped forward and asked Uran if she really thought the situation gave her the right to hit someone. At that moment, the second Vice Principal Ian, who was a sheep, joined in and asked what the issue was. He said that Bai had no problem hitting others, but suddenly acted like no one could touch him. Ian was clearly frustrated by this double standard. Principal Lee reminded everyone that Chinu was a special student and if he was found innocent, it could cause public backlash. But Uran stood by her opinion and said she had a proposal. She showed them her hand, which had Chinu's fingerprints, and said that he should become the school's representative. Ian jumped up and asked Uran if Chinu was threatening her. He said she was a skilled warrior and it was hard to believe a student was intimidating her. Uran explained that when she tried to revive Bai, Chinu grabbed her arm tightly and left a mark. She believed that an ordinary level 1 warrior couldn't have broken through her defense. She said she felt that Chinu was special and completely deserving of being the school's representative. Ian agreed that they needed to make an official statement soon so the white dogs wouldn't cause more trouble. He said this way they could consider the matter closed. Uran added that Chin Yu's victory couldn't be taken away and the white dogs would definitely come to them soon. So she wished the directors good luck. At that point, the men started to wonder if Uran was using them for her own goals. A few hours later, as expected, Bai showed up at the principal's office with his father. Yuna was already there with her daughter, Julie. Principal Lee greeted everyone and said the reason for the meeting should be clear, so they should get straight to the point. Yuna stayed calm, but when Yuli saw Bai's condition, she couldn't help laughing. Bai looked really defeated. His face was bruised and some bones were broken. Julie laughed and asked Bai if Chinu really gave him that much trouble. Then the president of the White Dogs group, President, turned to Yuna. He said he respected her past achievements on the battlefield, but her expression made it clear she wasn't going to hand over Chinu. Realizing this, the president warned her that he only respected her because of what she did in the past. He added that if they didn't hand over Chinu, he would just hire someone to deal with him. Then he asked Yuna how she was the only one who survived the war 10 years ago and why her order had become almost meaningless. Julie got angry hearing this and stood up, ready to attack the president. She told him to shut his mouth, but Yuna stopped her by placing a hand on her shoulder. She then asked the president if his words could be taken as a direct threat to a member of the Chivalry Order's family. At that moment all the directors looked surprised and even scared because the situation was getting tense and seemed close to exploding. President also got nervous and tried to explain, saying that wasn't what he meant. Then he added that Chinu was a demon and not part of their family. Ian thought to himself that Yuna seemed to care a lot about this boy. Yuna and her daughter then started to leave, saying that since no one had a real solution, there was nothing more to discuss. Finally, the president warned her not to forget that Chinu wasn't a normal boy. He said that Chinu was a demon and one day he would lose control and finish everyone. Yuna replied that she had made a bet with someone about that. They were betting on whether Chinu would one day reveal his true nature and become a monster. When Ian heard this, he guessed that the other person in the bet believed Chinu would eventually go crazy. Yuna proudly said that she was the one who made the bet on this outcome. Then she added that if things went wrong, she would take care of it. Meanwhile, the main character, Chinu, was riding a bus when he suddenly sneezed. He thought maybe someone was thinking about him. Then he got annoyed, remembering that the teacher had sent him here without saying anything or even asking for his permission to participate. He noticed a girl sitting on the next bus cleaning her sword. She looked really worried. When she saw that Chinu was staring at her, Her expression turned scared. Chinu smiled to himself. He remembered that many people called him a bull because one of his horns was broken. Seeing her fear, he decided to mess with her a little. He pressed his face against the glass, made a scary smile, and told her that he really was a demon hiding his true power until the day he would destroy everyone. He said the demons were coming, and they were already very close. Because of this, the bus swerved off the road and almost crashed into a pole. At the same time, Chinu felt his energy rising quickly. It was coming from the girl's fear and hostility. It felt good to him, like he was absorbing it. Since there were many people around, it was a good opportunity for him to collect more energy. Just then, he felt someone else's hostility growing toward him again. The feeling seemed familiar. When he looked up at a nearby building, he saw Yuna and Uli standing there. He guessed his aunt had found out what B did and was trying to be kind to him. Chinu decided he should return the favor for such a nice gift. So, when he saw his family, he gave the middle finger to his half-sister. Julie got a little angry and made an annoyed face. That reaction gave Chinu even more energy, which made him happy. The anger around him only made him stronger. Meanwhile, the host announced that the high school league competition had officially started. Like other events, it was supported by 123 companies and respected chivalry orders. 24 regiments of knights had come as honorary guests. The host pointed to the stands where the knights were watching everything seriously. As soon as they were introduced, they all hit their chests with their fists and shouted courage and justice. Then the other knight regiment stood up and shouted their own mottos. The audience got really excited because most of them had never seen knights in real life before. After that, the host said that humans and werewolves were united. He said their strength came from their unity and wished the participants success in leading the country to a bright future. Then he announced that everyone should welcome the 1.358 students who came to take part in the contest. Chinu watched everything with interest. When he realized that the other participants were about to enter the arena, he thought it was a great chance to absorb more energy. The host said that each participant would get 5 minutes to introduce themselves. He reminded them that everyone on the continent was watching. Then the participants began to walk into the arena one by one to greet the audience. Many shouted that they wanted to become famous and make the human race stronger and unbeatable. Soon it was Chin Yu's turn. As he walked up to the stage, he gave the middle finger to the entire crowd and called them scum. Julie felt completely embarrassed by her stepbrother and decided to pretend she didn't know him. The principal turned to Uran and asked if she thought Chinu was going too far. The teacher said maybe he was, but chose not to step in. Then the host announced that it was time to explain the rules of the competition. He said that all the participants would be sent to Nova Island for a whole week. For the first 3 days, food would be provided, but after that, they would need to find their own supplies. He also said that tens of thousands of monsters have been released on the island. These were dangerous beasts from the demon gates known as finishing machines. They were divided into 5 levels based on their strength. The monsters' bodies were already covered with special energy balls. The more balls a participant collected, the higher their score would be. At the end of this round, the top 100 students would be chosen to enter the final battle in the arena. The host explained that their scientists had developed energy balls that not only showed the participants live on screen, but could also save their lives in dangerous situations. However, if a participant used the ball's emergency feature to escape, they would be disqualified. The balls monitored each student's physical condition, and if their condition became too bad, they would be automatically transported to safety, which also meant disqualification. After explaining all this, the host turned back to the students and asked them to get ready to leave for the island. A tall man came forward and used a special skill to teleport everyone. When the students looked up, they saw a huge transparent dome appear above them as if it were pulling them into another space. In the next moment, they found themselves on a plane flying toward the island. Chinu thought the technique was quite unusual. Just then, people on the plane started shouting that there was a demon on board. When Chinu looked around, he realized they were talking about him. Without wasting time, some of the students ran at him and said they wouldn't let a demon live. Meanwhile, Yuna and Uli were watching everything on a screen. Julie asked her mom if she thought Chinu could get a good position in the rankings. Yuna said no, she didn't think so. Julie asked why since Chinu was strong, even stronger than her. Yuna replied that no matter how strong Chinu was, it didn't matter. She reminded Yuli that Chinu came from a region linked with demons for thousands of years. And the other players wouldn't let him succeed because of the hatred toward demons. In her mind, Julie thought that Chinu was different from other demons and not as bad as people thought. She looked back at the screen showing her half-B brother Tiecha and silently wished him good luck. At that moment, several participants attacked Chinu together. They said they would cut off his head and offer it as a sacrifice to fallen warriors. Chinu quickly said he was just joking and that he wasn't really a demon. But one of the attackers kicked him in the head and said he needed to finish Chinu first to remove a strong competitor. Chinu realized he couldn't just let this continue. He hit the guy in the face and easily handled the rest of the attackers. Then he walked over to a backpack one of them had dropped. He looked at the others and said they were all just disgusting. Right then, his energy increased dramatically because of all the hatred directed at him. Chinu didn't hesitate. He punched the plane floor, creating a hole, and everyone started falling through it. But he was prepared to fall. He transported him to another place. Meanwhile, the main character calmly floated down using a parachute. He thought to himself that this energy ball would come in handy. Soon he landed in a sandy mountainous area. He carefully descended and after a few moments his feet touched the ground. When Julie saw this, she looked happy and excited for her brother. But the president was really upset. It was like he had lost consciousness after realizing that Chinu had taken down the elite students from his school and was still completely fine. At that moment, Julie overheard the other spectators saying that Chinu was finished now because the Phantom Bull, a level 3 beast, had noticed him. Meanwhile, the main character stood in the middle of the field, completely unaware that a monster was standing right behind him. Chinu looked around and noticed that the place was pretty unpleasant. Meanwhile, a bull started getting angry. Steam came out of its nose as it charged straight at him. Julie, watching from a distance, mentally begged him to pay attention and be careful. While Shenyu was checking out the area, 2 bulls were already approaching, ready to attack. At the same time, insects were stinging his back, and he cursed himself, wondering why there were so many bugs here. When he turned around, the bulls that were about to attack him were already unconscious, and he hadn't even realized when he managed to defeat them. At that moment, the directors sitting in the assembly hall were shocked. They thought he hadn't been this strong before, but now, it seemed like a different story. One of them turned to his assistants and asked if they had any idea about what was going on. He thought to himself that this kid was raised by Yuna, a heroine, so maybe it wasn't surprising he turned out this strong. Still, he wanted to test him further. Meanwhile, Chinu decided to have a snack. He used a strange red ball and when the teachers and officials saw this, they were shocked. They couldn't believe he was actually eating energy balls. Those were the key to passing the trials. Chinu found it tasty, then looked at the bowl and figured the meat was useless anyway since he didn't know how to cook it. After cooling off, he got up and decided it was time to start earning points. To increase his energy, he went to a bear's den and stole 2 cubs from their mother. After that, he climbed a rock and used an eagle egg to make scrambled eggs for himself. The audience watching him was extremely surprised. He didn't seem to care about his safety at all. While enjoying his risky adventures, Chinu suddenly noticed dog ears sticking out of the grass. He thought he'd never had a dog before and ran toward the ears, thinking it was a puppy he could take with him. But when he grabbed them, he realized it wasn't a puppy. It was a small girl named Kwan with dog ears, who cried out in pain as he pulled on her. When he realized she was a girl, he screamed in shock and quickly let go. Just then, 3 more girls with dog ears appeared. Yu, Chi, and Lan. They were Kwan's older sisters. When they saw her crying on the grass with Chin Yu standing over her, the scene looked very suspicious. Kwan, the youngest of the group, sat on the grass and cried. Lon went over to comfort her and mentioned that the hero seemed like a decent guy. Chi, however, was upset and said she wanted the hero to die. The oldest sister, Yu, figured out it was all just a misunderstanding. Chinu, confused, asked why they were beating him if they knew it was a misunderstanding. He said if it weren't for him, their sister could have been in danger. That's when the girls realized they had seen him before, but seeing him in person was more interesting than watching him on a screen. Yu remembered he was the same guy who had acted provocatively during a competition. Chinu didn't pay much attention to them and instead showed him a snake and a crocodile. Asking if they wanted to help cook, Kwan got excited and grabbed a knife, slicing the snake into thin pieces. Yu worked on seasoning the meat with herbs to add flavor. When the main character looked at the girls, it felt like she was on some kind of cooking show. She thought they were trying so hard that when they opened the lid, the food would be made of real gold. But the crocodile didn't understand how the cooking could turn out like this. Even the system said the crocodile was angrier now because of how it was cooked than when Chinu had killed it. The girls came over and asked Chinu why he wasn't eating. He said that if he tried the dish, he might as well commit suicide. But the girls insisted, saying they were used to letting the guests eat first. So Chinu had to try it. There was nothing in the dish that looked edible, and he wasn't even hungry. So he refused and told the girls to try it themselves. An argument started and no one wanted to try the awful crocodile dish. Just then, they heard a voice behind them. A girl shouted at Chinu, telling him to let her sisters go. Before he could react, a sword flew past him and knocked the bowl of green liquid out of his hands. He turned toward the direction it came from and saw another girl walking toward him. As she got closer, she suddenly jumped to attack. The girls recognized her as their older sister, Sha, but they hadn't expected her to show up. Chinu realized he had nothing to defend himself with. So in a panic, he grabbed Kwan by her hood and held her in front of him as a shield. At the last second, Xiao Shao turned her sword away to avoid hurting her sister and only cut off a small bit of her ponytail. When Xia Sha saw he had used her little sister as a shield, she became furious. Chinu could feel how angry she was. Meanwhile, Kwan was waving her arms and yelling at Chinu to let her go. Eventually, he tossed her aside. The sisters rushed over to Kwan, who was crying, and asked if she was okay. Chinu looked at all of them and noticed they had big floppy ears hanging to the sides. He guessed they definitely weren't Doc's Huns. When Xia Sha heard that, she got even more upset. She called Chinu a one-horned demon and said she wouldn't let him get away with bullying them. She pointed her sword at him again and threatened to rip off his horn. Chinu was annoyed and tried to dodge her attacks while explaining that her sisters had tried to poison him. As the girls kept attacking all at once, he realized it didn't feel like a fair fight. It was more like getting jumped by a gang. He stood next to a big tree as the girls surrounded him. But he wasn't ready to give up. He pulled the tree out of the ground and started swinging the trunk around, knocking the girls away. Xia Sha realized her sisters couldn't handle him, so she decided to take over. She turned her sword and started chopping the tree. Chinu noticed Xiao's Sha was moving like a pencil sharpener, and soon she had carved one end of the tree into a sharp point. He knew he had to stop her somehow, so he ran toward her, holding the log. At the last second, Xia Sha stabbed her sword straight into the sharpened end of the tree. But her sword got stuck. Chinu stopped and asked her if she really thought she could beat him. Then he said he was done talking. He threw the log with full force, sending it and Xia Sha flying in the other direction. But she wasn't giving up. She used a move called ground impact, put her hands forward, and launched dozens of stones at him. Chinu realized no one had warned him about this, but he had no plans to quit. He stood up and blocked the attacks with his hands. Chinu blocked all the attacks and the stones flew back toward Xia Sha. Julie, who was watching everything, was shocked. She knew Xiao Sha was already at the 3rd level and Yuna pointed out that reaching that level at her age was rare. She said Xia Sha had a bright future ahead. Julie saw pieces of earth flying at high speed, causing serious damage. They were like bullets. She had heard that demons from the other side didn't react to such attacks, but she couldn't believe Chinu could handle them, too. Meanwhile, the main character thought to himself that the girl's powers were dangerous and he shouldn't let Xiao Sha attack again. So, without wasting time, he rushed forward, deciding to fight her hand to hand. Xiao Sha immediately tensed up. She knew she couldn't let him get too close. She pushed off the ground, raised her arms, and created a huge stone wall in front of her. But Xinyu was stronger. He jumped over the wall easily, and ran straight toward her at full speed. Xiao Sha was ready. She threw stone blocks at him, trying to stop him. She thought Chinui wanted to distract her with the dust and smoke so he could get close. But she believed that wouldn't work on her because she was a dog type and had no problem seeing through it. She smiled, turned in his direction, and said she was about to catch him. But at that moment, Chinu was already behind her. He grabbed her by the neck and said, smiling, that he had tricked her. People watching the fight could tell it wasn't a fair move. They said Chinu was just using sneaky tricks and deserved a penalty for it. The only person who seemed happy was Julie, who shouted out to cheer for her brother. Their mother, however, started to think that maybe Chinu was stronger than she had thought. After all, he had many chances to hurt Yuli earlier when she was bothering him. But he never did anything. She looked at Chinu, who was now sitting calmly by the fire, and started wondering if maybe he was different from the other demons. After the fight, Chinu showed Xiao Sha a plate with a dinosaur head sticking out of it. He said it was proof that her sisters had tried to poison him. But Xiao said she believed his strong demon stomach could handle it. And besides, appearances could be deceiving. Hearing that, Chinu got angry and said if that was the case, he'd be happy to see the girls eat it themselves. The girls immediately started protesting. Xiao thought to herself that the dish was definitely not edible. She knew her sisters weren't great cooks, so she tried to distract Chinu and said she knew where to find real food. But Chinu didn't listen. He stayed silent and poured the contents of the bowl into Xiao's mouth. She fell to the ground, and her sisters started panicking, worried about her. That's when Xinyu realized he should have listened to Xia Sha. Maybe she really did know where to find something edible. On the 3rd day, a helicopter arrived at the island with boxes of food. The messengers sat near the fire to rest. One of the boys suggested they eat kebabs now before they got cold and didn't taste good. But just then, something rushed past and snatched the food from their hands. When the messenger looked up, he saw a girl sitting in a tree nearby. It turned out to be Quan. She had stolen all the food and was now happily sitting on a branch eating the kebabs. The messenger tried to calm her down, saying there was no need to steal food since they had plenty. But suddenly, someone appeared behind the messenger and hit her hard on the back, knocking her out cold. It turned out that Chinu and Xia Sha had knocked out the messengers and were now ready to take all the food they brought. Big Sister was right. There was a lot of food here, and thanks to Xia Sha, they even managed to get some chicken wings. However, at that moment, the girl noticed something odd. She saw the icon of the people they knocked out and realized they were from the 3rd group of resource distribution workers. So, they attacked the employees. When Xiao Sha and Chinu heard this, they looked at Yu, surprised, as they continued eating the chicken wings. Soon, they realized what they had done. Xiao Sha quickly started grabbing food boxes, saying they needed to pick them up and leave before anyone found out. They figured they could close in a ring when the other participants arrived. Just then, Lan turned around and saw someone standing behind them. She realized they hadn't escaped in time. At that moment, Chinu stood up and told the girls not to worry. He assured them he had a plan and that they could get even more supplies than they thought. Meanwhile, a whole group of fighters approached them, also wanting to get resources. One of the participants asked the commander if he was sure they were heading in the right direction. He suggested it was pointless to go there since before the competition started. They were warned that no food would be distributed after the first day. However, the commander assured him that due to an accident, 90% of the participants were stranded halfway and couldn't get supplies. He didn't think they'd let everyone starve. According to his assumption, the supply points would disappear only after all participants had taken their share. Soon, the boys arrived at the spot and saw boxes of supplies in front of them. A smile appeared on their faces as they realized they hadn't come in vain. In front of them stood a man dressed as a messenger. They didn't suspect he was actually one of the participants. Chinu greeted the boys and said he was glad to see they made it there. They thanked the messenger for his hard work and the leader asked for supplies for 4. Chini then asked what range of supplies they wanted. The boys were surprised to hear about the range of supplies as they had never heard of it before. Chinu pointed to a table with different boxes of food, each corresponding to a different rank. He said that since their competition was of a high level, they couldn't just leave participants to their fate. The most appetizing set was the rank D set, so all the boys asked the messenger for that one. When Chinu heard their requests, he asked him to prepare 4 energy balls as payment for 4 sets of rank 3 supplies. The leader was shocked, realizing they had to pay for the supplies. Chinu put on a surprised face and said that nothing in this world was free, so they would have to pay for the supplies in the competition. The boy objected, saying that the 4 energy balls were all they had collected in the last few days, and he didn't want to just give them away for food. Meanwhile, the girls hid behind the boxes and watched everything. Kwan asked her older sister if she thought Chinu would really be able to exchange food for energy balls. The girl replied that they could only trust him at that moment. Chinu tried to stay calm, but inside he was already feeling victorious because he knew the others were now in a tough spot. One of the participants asked what he had just said, but Chinu acted like he hadn't said anything. The guy insisted, saying that if Chinu told him what was going on, they would pay him for the information. Chinu laughed and said that he wasn't a tyrant and was willing to make some concessions. He told them he had heard something, but only if they promised not to tell anyone. He then asked if they knew why resources were assigned to different ranks. The boys looked confused because they didn't know the answer. Chinu explained that it was a hidden bonus feature. Those who used energy balls would get double rewards after the game ended. The girls who were watching were impressed by how smart Chinu was and were excited to hear this. They asked Chinu if he was telling the truth. Chinu smiled and said it was true. He also added that the leader of this group had a cute face, which was why he promised not to tell the others. The boy looked confused and asked what others Chinu was talking about. Chinu silently pointed to a spot and suddenly other participants who were also looking for resources jumped out of the bushes. At that moment, the boy decided to act fast and gave away the energy balls for 4 sets of rank D before the other participants could do it. The girls watching realized that Chinu was very clever and his plan to deceive everyone was brilliant. Meanwhile, there was an uproar among the spectators. The organizers asked the directors how a participant named Chin Yu managed to tie up the employees. They also said this was against the rules and he should return the balls he had taken. However, the director told them that what Chinu did wasn't illegal. It was just an exchange of resources. Deputy Director Liu also said the organizers should be glad someone thought of such a clever way to do things. Representatives from other schools whose students had been tricked were confused and asked what their students should do now. Vice Principal Yang joined the conversation and asked why there was so much confrontation. He said that if any rule had been broken, it would have been reported, and since nothing had happened, everything was fine. The organizers, seeing how blatantly their students had been deceived, silently cursed Chinu for tricking everyone and getting away with it. Meanwhile, Chinu's trade continued. A crowd of participants had gathered around him, happily handing over their energy balls in exchange for the promised prizes. However, just as the boys were about to leave, they suddenly heard an associate employee's voice. He informed them that Chinu wasn't an actual staff member. It turned out that one of the couriers had managed to escape and revealed that the couriers were tied up and had their clothes stolen to pose as employees. They were tricked into helping Chinu get free resources. As soon as the participants realized they had been deceived, anger spread among them. Some looked at each other unsure of what to do. When they turned towards the store where Chinu had been, they saw that he had already escaped with his partners. And that's a wrap for today's video. If you enjoyed the content, hit that like button for more juicy updates. And don't forget to smash that subscribe button so you never miss